Okay, welcome in. We're back again today. One second, just getting organized here. Okay, so coming in back today, I just wanted to go through some of the latest builds. The ones that I'm using on this it's a third account, but it's essentially the primary account that I'm running through and actively using at this point. Yesterday we went over the Warden. I covered what I was using for a tank as well as a stam build. So today I figured I'd run through what I'm running currently on DragonKnight. I believe this is similar in that it has a tank and a stam, but let's hop in and find out here. After running through a number of classes and tanking on those classes, I've come back to the DK as of recently for tanking purposes as my primary tank. I think that's probably one of the fun aspects of theory crafting and doing these builds is that you get typically I'll get an idea or a new set will come out or something will change that will create enough difference that I can hop back in and either tweak an existing build, or if it's maybe it's a new set release or something like that, I can put together something completely different from what I had before, and I can usually get a good month or so of gameplay out of that, just having fun with the new build. So the theory crafting and the building in many ways is what keeps me going in the game. Once you've done a lot of the other content, it's one of the reasons that I come back to the game is to try out new builds and new sets. Just looking through the existing stuff here. Jester's Festival is going live. I think that started yesterday. We got our goofy hats. Monkey. Alright. Yep. Jester's Festival is definitely going. Let's see here. Let's hop over. Head over someplace that's out of main traffic area. Okay. Right down here. So this is, I've primarily been running this build as a tank, or this character, the DragonKnight, as a tank as of late. DragonKnights were the original old school tanking class. You can tank in every single class. Not really a limitation there, but some classes have more built into their kit by default. The DragonKnight, or DK as it's known, is definitely one of those that's been designed for tanking from the get-go, so it works quite well without having to incorporate a bunch of skills from other trees. So in this particular case, I've run a ton of builds, honestly, on DKs in the past. DKs tend to have not necessarily a huge amount of magicka skills, but I would say probably about half of the stuff that they typically would be running nowadays is going to be magicka based. And as a tank, you also want to make sure that you have plenty of stamina for blocking, breaking free, what have you. So stamina is always going to be the primary focus. You absolutely don't want to run out of stamina as a tank. Magicka becomes more generally utility for the group in one form or another, whether it's shielding or chaining, CC, that type of stuff. But if you run out of magicka, generally speaking, you're not going to die as a tank. If you run out of stamina, there's a good chance you're going to get one shot, or two shot if you're a heavier health tank. But your main heal as a DK is magicka based, so potentially I suppose you could, if you can't heal and you're low health or something like that, you might die as a result of no magicka. But generally speaking, magicka is for non-essential skills. So the focus generally, stamina being the priority, but there is a decent amount of magicka use. With the DK specifically, you've got Choking Talons, typically is what you're running this particular morph, because it does the minor maim on a tank, because this is your CC, so that's magicka. Igneous Shield is also magicka. That's going to shield you and your group, as well as, because it's part of Earth and Heart, this is going to trigger your resource return. Yeah, it's Helping Hands. So this is going to restore stamina. So this is a mechanism for trading magicka for stamina, as well as shielding your group, but this is something that's going to be cast a lot. Repeatedly. Chaining is also magicka based. This one, if you chain multiple times, excuse me, and they're already CC'd, or if it's a boss that's already, well, a boss in general is not going to be able to get chained. So this particular morph restores the magicka cost if they can't be chained, which definitely helps with the magicka sustain. But for any chainable mob that hasn't already been CC'd, this is going to cost you 3,000 plus magicka every time you cast it, and you're potentially chaining in a decent number of mobs. So you've got these three skills are the primary, but they're all magicka. Typically nowadays, Frost Staff on the back bar for a lot of tanks, that has become kind of the status quo. So with that being said, you've got Blockade of Frost, which is also magicka. You've got your main heal, which is somewhat expensive. That's also magicka. And then Inner Rage, which is also magicka. This does have a stamina morph. If you find that works better from a balance perspective, that's an option. But in my particular case, because there are so many different magicka skills, and in fact I've got this on here as well, this is not a requirement, but it's just one more thing that you can bring to the group. This is also X number of magicka per second. So pretty heavy on the magicka use from a tanking perspective. Granted, most of it is utility, with the exception of your heal, but as you can tell, there's going to be a lot of magicka drain. So I've tried different build setups in the past, trying to get kind of a balance in the hybridization between stamina and magicka, where you've got stamina sets with high mag recovery, or magicka sets with some element of stamina return. And what I found on DKs personally is I didn't want to be starving for resources, and I also wanted to use as much of the kit, the DragonKnight kit, as possible. So I wanted to be able to have Choking Talons, to be able to cast Igneous Shield over and over and over, as well as chaining. And with the addition of the Destruction Staff on the back bar, you've got more skills as well that are going to be magicka. So this time around, I actually went with a very old school setup for my secondary set. As you're familiar at this point, if you've watched my other videos for tanking, leeching is kind of a go-to for me. I like leeching for the survivability. And so as a base set, this is similar to New Moon for my damage dealers. So leeching is here, that's not surprising. And the secondary set I went with in this particular case is Seducer. Seducer has been around, I believe since I started playing the game, for sure. I'm guessing this came out initially, from the very first day. So this has been around for a very, very long time. It's a craftable set, so I can kind of bring in the pieces that I need. And as you can tell from looking at the stats, it's going to offer a lot in terms of magicka sustain. You've got 2 recovery bonuses, the overall max magicka, and then 10% cost reduction to all of your magicka abilities. So this set alone will make a huge impact on your ability to sustain all of those magicka abilities and cast them as often as you want as a tank. So you're bringing a lot of steady utility to the group, where you're not going to have to worry about, am I going to run out of magicka to be able to cast shields for people when they need it, or CC, or chain people in. So the jewelry is leeching as well, all healthy. Your primary heal as a DK is based off of max health. So more health on a tank is survivability, as well as it's going to boost the power of that heal. And I'm running golden chance for magicka recovery on all 3 pieces of this, so this is going to further boost the mag recovery. Leeching doesn't specifically offer anything for stamina or magicka, but this is both the health, the healing taken, and then the poison damage that it's putting out is going to heal you for anybody that's standing in those pools. The helm, because it's a DK, this is both useful, but it's also thematic, because this is a big fiery circle basically that surrounds you. It gives you max magicka, plus it's going to increase the amount of flame damage that your team is doing and reduce the amount of flame damage that they're taking. So for a lot of groups, I think probably more commonly the damage dealers are magicka, but I tend to do pickup groups with this tank a lot, so you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. But this particular build, being more magicka focused, I went with Encratis because, again, thematically it's got the look and the feel that ties in with DragonKnight, and it works well in terms of flame damage, which is generally tied to magicka, etc. So, so leeching, seducers for the sustain, recovery, cost reduction, sword and board on the front. I'm running charged. This is due to a recent change. Actually, they buffed resource return on DragonKnights, and DragonKnights specifically when they do flame damage as well as poison damage, they can get magicka back and stamina back, respectively, when those status effects are in place. So I'm doing flame damage on the front, and then the back bar, which is also charged, is doing poison damage. And from testing, the charged actually, from a sustain standpoint, works very, very well. This is one of the first times in a long time that I've run charged. There have been other traits that you can use that are equally as good or potentially better, but because of the recent changes, charged is actually quite good for DKs if you're having sustain issues. The flame damage on the front bar also, it makes it very, very easy to proc Encratis Behemoth, because anytime you do flame damage, this is going to be active. And so I literally just need to whack an enemy with this once, generally speaking, and that will be up, so that triggers the Encratis as well. For this particular build, I do like Sword and Board combined with the Destro. You'll note on some of my other tank builds that are more stamina focused, that don't use a lot of magicka skills, I tend to go with Sword and Board, the Sword and Shield on both bars. So it's kind of a mix-up. I like playing either playstyle works for me. Using a Destro on the back works just as well. And it adds a different element versus just Sword and Board on the front and the back. So I like that. And for the hybridization across with the new armory system, where you can basically swap out different builds, I actually went for this particular setup and really to maximize the sustain element of it, I went with Breton. I have in the past, recent past, I've actually switched several of my builds to Imperial, or my races, excuse me, to Imperial, purely so that it would span across tank, magicka, and stamina builds, because I was looking for a race that would be a good hybrid without having to race change. Obviously, I want to be able to just swap builds and have it still be effective. So I think Imperial is probably my top choice, but in this particular instance, I really, really wanted to bring in as much sustain as possible, and the Bretons in their racial passives have an additional 7% cost reduction for magicka skills, which is additive. So you've got the 7% plus the 10% you get from Seducer. You get spell resistance, plus the mag recovery here, and then max magicka. So these three, for a magicka focused build, are quite good. So I have never had any sustain issues at all running this setup. Most of the primary skills being magicka. See, defensive stance is here, but I don't use that for shielding, so it's here primarily for the passive to reduce the block cost. And then pierce armor is giving you major and minor breach. So this is stamina. This I don't cast, it's just passive. Yeah, so there are no other stamina abilities. I have balance on here. This is a higher health tank. I'm not sure if I have food. I do have food on. So he's sitting at 44,000. So it's a higher health. I've seen much higher than this, but this is a decent amount of health. So that's going to boost the power of your heal. Generally speaking, in order to really maximize the heal, you want to hit Igneous Shield before, and then heal. And obviously this heal is based off of missing health. So the more health you're missing, the stronger the stronger the green dragon blood heal will be. I oftentimes will actually run this in combat without necessarily needing a heal, just because it's also giving you the major fortitude, endurance, and vitality. So this actually helps with the stam recovery. The Sword and Board will also help with stamina, because you can get returns, stamina returns off of heavy attacks with the Sword and Board. So that's another reason why it's I have seen some builds that are heavily Magicka focused where they do destruction staff on both bars, and you can do that, but you really are going to need some method for getting stamina back at that point, because you no longer can heavy attack to get stamina back, because you don't have a stamina weapon. You only have Magicka weapons, so you would need some method for getting stamina return, whether it's potions or some of the sets that you're wearing, something to that effect. So this gives you a good balance. You can get stamina back or Magicka back with heavy attacks on each bar respectively. But again, I find that I don't tend to need it, and especially on the DK, you can spam Igneous a lot. And because that's the Earthen Heart passive, the Helping Hands passive, that will give me stamina back on this particular setup as well. So there are several means that I have of getting stamina back, and the bulk of it is Magicka focused as far as skill use, so I do not find I have any issues with stamina on this build, and the Magicka, there's also zero issues because of the sets that I'm running. This is probably overkill for some people. Obviously there are plenty of people out there that are not running Leeching for survivability. They're certainly not running Seducer. And I've tried those setups as well, and I've been able to succeed, get through content, but I find it's really ends up being harder than it needs to be. For me personally, my playstyle, I like having probably more resources than I need, so that I'm not going to run short. And with this type of a setup, I can cast without, going to ridiculous lengths. I can cast as much as I need to and not have to worry that I'm going to be running out of resources, which means I'm providing constant utility to the group. I'm able to CC when I need to, shield when I need to, etc. So this has been actually a lot of fun. It's Seducer, which was kind of fun to go back to. I haven't run that set in probably 4+ years. It's been a very long time, so going back to an old school set was also kind of a fun thing, being able to craft that. And it's pretty straightforward to play. As you can tell, this is pretty standard loadout for a DK. With your CC, shield, and chaining. I've got Spell Wall on the front, primarily just for emergencies, for pickup groups if I need to res someone. Generally speaking, I'm running an Aggressive Horn on the back, which increases the overall group damage and resources. Balance is here just because it is a higher health. You can use balance. You don't have to, but in my case, I'm using balance both for trading health for Magicka, but this is also my main access to major resolve, so this gives me my additional resistances. So this is kind of a twofold benefit. You could run the hardened armor or volatile armor, whichever your preference, as well. This is actually fairly cheap from a Magicka cost standpoint, so it's just personal preference. This gives me both my major resolve, but it also gives me a mechanism. If I do run low on Magicka, I can just hit this, and it trades health for Magicka, so that actually works pretty well. Let's see. CP is pretty much the kind of the standard setup that I go with for most of the builds nowadays, where I've got Ironclad, 20 points into here because that's 10% damage reduction just passively all the time. And then Duelist's Rebuff, Enduring Resolve, and Unassailable are the next three. Beyond that, it's kind of personal preference as to whether you're bumping up some little extra stamina, Magicka, going into healing areas. It depends on how much CP you have and where you want to focus. These four are kind of the primary areas that I start with, which gives you your 4 slottables, and then the rest is just a matter of finding the right passives that work for you. Over here, health, like I said, it's a tank, so health is going to boost your survivability, as well as any tank that has a health-based heal. This is going to increase that, so that's a nice bonus. In this case, I went with a little additional armor just because it's not a Nord. It's a Breton. Although the Bretons do get additional spell resistance, they don't get the corresponding physical resistance. So this helps to buff that a little bit. When you're affected with a status effect, this is going to reduce the cost of your skills. That's all combat skills, so that includes blocking, dodge rolling, breaking free, in addition to your active skills that you're using. And then the last one is Bracing Anchor, which is essentially more block mitigation. It does add a snare effectively to you, so it reduces your speed, but that 20% block mitigation, and as a tank, generally speaking, it's not that you don't need to move at all, but the addition of the snare isn't enough of a con that it's not worth taking this, in my opinion. 20% block mitigation is huge, so definitely worth it. Food wise, depending on the build, there are some builds where I don't run Bewitched Sugar Skulls, but for a balanced build, I find this to be probably the best food. You can pick this up on Guild Traders fairly cheaply nowadays, and the stats that you get out of it are quite good. It's a nice healthy chunk. So and then the Atronac just for additional mag recovery in this setup because you're so heavy on Magicka. So I think that covers the tank side. Let me switch over now. I don't believe there's... Just realized I don't think there is an armory station here. Oh, yeah, there is. Okay. That's the tank setup. And switch over to the DPS here. This is a STAM setup. And I believe on this one, this was originally one of the first characters, if not the first character over on this account. So starting over with lower CP, not as much access to equipment. One of the things that I look at is using craftable armor is commonly a part of my builds, my setup, especially when you're starting out new, because it's something that you can make yourself with the traits that you're looking for, that kind of thing. So this, I believe, yeah, it was running Palinals. So this was set up more as a solo grinding, going out and questing when I was just trying to earn CP. So this is not necessarily optimized for 4-man content. Okay, so it's Palinals. So this is Palinals is a set that actually was around for years. It used to be the go-to for hybrids because it boosted your weapon damage and your spell damage to equal numbers based on whichever was higher. Excuse me. I think with all the hybridization, recent hybridization changes, they decided that set would essentially be useless after the changes. And so they completely overhauled this set to be completely different from what it was before. It doesn't have any of the old characteristics at all. The new set, I know a lot of people that ran the set as a hybrid that probably had it golded out and all sorts of things. Were very disappointed to see a set essentially disappear like that. I can understand the disappointment. I did try running it a few times on some hybrid builds. I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but I understood why people did it. The new set, however, I think kind of flew under the radar a little bit. This, while it may not work for every scenario, like I said, 4-man content, trials, you're probably not going to see anybody running this. But if you look at the stats that this provides, and the fact that it's craftable, this is a fantastic set for soloing. If you're someone that's out questing on your own, although quests usually aren't that difficult in terms of dealing with the mobs, but just soloing, grinding, this is a fantastic set. You look at the 2, 3, and the 4 piece, you've got weapon and spell damage, 2 of those plus the penetration, always going to be good for damage. And whenever you kill an enemy, you gain a damage shield that absorbs, in my case, I'm looking at 14,000 plus for 10 seconds. And you gain weapon and spell damage. You do take damage back, so you need to be aware that you have to have some sort of off healing to compensate for that. There is that aspect to be aware of, but when you're going through and you're just grinding, solo grinding, with the damage shield on and the ability to amp up your damage so quickly, like if you're going through mobs, this is a really, really, really great set. You can see the scaling down below, that the damage shield is off of the weapon and spell damage, and the damage itself off your max health. So pumping up giving this character some additional health helps with the damage that you're able to do, but it also offsets the oblivion damage that's coming in as a result of the gain. So it's very easy to compensate for the downsides of this, and the upsides of this are really, really good if you're going through grinding. So great solo set. And it looks like I combined that with Kinra's. Kinra's is another, I would say this is actually fairly top tier nowadays for both mag and stam, because of the hybridization changes that they made. Kinra's is going to be good for either, just because it's giving you 2 weapon and spell damage and then the crit chance, and then you can stack up to get the major berserk. Very, very good set. This is also thematically fun because it kind of fits with the fire theme, and overall the damage output from this is quite good, and it's boosting the damage of your group if you happen to be running in a group too. Kinra's is good for virtually all content. I don't think this is going to be bad anywhere, whether it's solo, 4-man, or trials. Kinra's is going to be seen in all 3. So highly recommend Kinra's if you can get a hold of it. It is a dungeon set. I don't remember off the top of my head where this drops, but it's a DLC dungeon set. So I combined that with Palinals. Magma Incarnate, I believe this was one of the sets that I was running on my previous tank build, because this is a nice option to run for 4-man group content, dungeon content. But on a DK, typically, I found my personal experiences generally sustain is more of an issue, only because they are set up as DKs are kind of peculiar in that their ultimate is used to generate resources. So when you cast your ultimate, you're going to get X number of resources back, and it's something that even after years of playing this game, still haven't quite gotten used to. Because I tend to, like potions and other resources, I tend to hold on to things until I feel the need to use them. So, and there are times even when you're playing where you do want to hold on to your ultimate. So this being used as a form of resource sustain can be a little tricky at times. So I've found personally that resource sustain on DKs tends to be a little more difficult than some of the other classes. That's just my playstyle. And as a result of that, I just kept this on here because it adds both mag and stam recovery, which is just a nice little bonus. and I had it in the kit anyway, so... Sorry about that. So this is kind of a solo setup. It's focused on damage and grinding, and the fact that I'm running Ring of the Pale Order only further proves that's what I was using this for. Again, I haven't run the damage side of this in quite some time. I've been basically tanking with this character, so this is a setup that I created well before I started tanking. So I'm just kind of reviewing it with you at the same time. Ring of the Pale Order is it's a great mythic if you're soloing. They did alter this a while back to where it went from being completely overpowered and everybody in Trials was running this to they nerfed it to the point where it was... I'm trying to remember if there was a point in between. I want to say there was a point where it got nerfed almost into uselessness, and then they brought it back. The most recent change, which I think is a good change overall, is essentially the amount of healing that you get from it is proportional to the amount of people in your group. So the more people in the group, the less healing you get. But for solo, for grinding, this is a fantastic resource. The amount of damage that you're doing, you're basically going to get healed for, and given the amount of damage that this can put out, this is another thing that will help compensate. So it's just kind of healing you on the fly. It works similar to Crit Surge on Sorks, or Templars main spammable. I'm gonna think of it as Biting Jabs. It's the magic of Morph of that, where it heals you for doing damage. So this works similar to that. And it, again, compensates for the Pelinals with the incoming damage, and just in general will allow you to grind and solo through areas much more quickly, because it's just healing you on the fly. So Nirnhound and Precise, dual daggers. This is a very common setup for me. I really do like dual wield. It's for PvE, dual wield is definitely my preference. For PvP, two-handed is my preference, but for PvE, which is a lot of the content that I run, I really do like dual wield. The main drawback with dual wield for me over the years was that for classes that didn't have access to Major Brutality, Major Sorcery, well, I didn't need Sorcery, but Major Brutality at the time, this was a bit more of a pain, because the only option at that point was the Hidden Blade skill, which you can see here I didn't even bother to level it. Just personal preference, it's a playstyle thing. I don't like this skill. I've loathed this skill from the get-go, so I was kind of forced to use it on Templars and Necros when they came out similarly, because this was the only access to Major Brutality. I've always found it to be clunky. Having to cast something beforehand in order to get your buff, so now the enemies are all alerted. It always felt bad to me, so I never liked using it. Thankfully, Werewolf, quite some time ago, they actually switched it to where Hircine's bounty passively gained Major Brutality and Sorcery, so a lot of my dual wield builds for Templar and Necro, specifically because until recently they didn't have access to Major Brutality, I would just basically slot this. So you're getting Major Brutality just passively. Which worked out well, because it is just passive. It saves me from having to cast an ability, so I'm saving on resources. It is only active on one bar, but primarily I'm on the front bar for doing damage anyway, so this is a good alternative for anybody else that's in that same boat. Templars did just recently, in the last 3 months, It's fairly recent. I don't remember how recent, but they the devs did a change to where biting jabs now, instead of giving you your crit bonus, it's now giving you your I believe it was major savagery before, which buffed your crit. It's now giving you major brutality every time you use it. So that was actually a very nice change. I know some people didn't care for it, but I found it to be a good change because it allowed me then to slot the Camo Hunter to get my crit bat, but this gives you both the crit, it gives you the 5% minor berserk bonus if you're flanking, and it gives you an additional 3% damage from Fighter's Guild passive. So slotting this where I used to slot the Werewolf ability actually gave me even more benefits, and now I'm getting major brutality from biting jabs. So that's a separate class, separate topic, I guess, but just changes as they go along. This is part of the theory crafting and differences that allow you to come back and alter your builds. So dual wield, the crit on this is probably decent. Or it's that 36.9. It's not great. It's okay. So it's not a crit focused build. Primarily just soloing. So you've got damage and survivability with the shield and the healing. And then the back bar is an infused Maelstrom bow. This is also fairly standard, both for me and probably a lot of stamina builds nowadays. Maelstrom is a great choice. You can run Maelstrom on normal, which is all I did. I don't think I've completed on Vet yet, so that's actually one piece of content that I have yet to do. But given how easy it is to run on normal, and the fact that the bonus that you get from this on the perfected version really isn't useful. You're not on your back bar a whole lot, just for quick buffing, and then you're back on your front bar, so you're not gaining a lot. I believe it's either weapon damage or penetration for the perfected version, so you're not really missing out on a lot, and it's a lot quicker to go through and get these on normal anyway. So skills wise, I'm running Camo Hunter on this as well. That does boost the crit, like I said, minor berserk, and you get the 3% damage bonus because it's a Fighter's Guild ability. Deadly Cloak for the damage. Bloodthirst, this is an additional source of healing with this particular morph, so the more damage that you're doing, the more you're going to heal from this as well. Whirling Blades, grinding, this is a great skill to have. It's got a built-in execute based on the passives of the dual wield, and it's AoE. Venomous Claw is single target, but when you do get to the point where you're hitting individual targets, this is a great skill that amps up over time, so very, very powerful skill. Flawless Dawnbreaker is a fairly cheap ultimate. This is actually a nice ultimate to have, that when you do use it, it will boost your weapon and spell damage for 20 seconds by 300. So this is a nice boost, plus the damage that it deals up front, and a damage over time as well. And when you use this, you're getting resources back based on DK passives, so it's a decent option. Having it slotted on your bar also gives you an additional 3% damage, because it's a Fighter's Guild ability. And then back bar ultimate, we've got Standard and Might. You can use either one. If for grinding, you really probably are not going to end up using this. This is definitely more for boss fights, because it's going to drop. This particular morph doesn't move. Once you drop it, it's fixed. It's a very, very good ultimate. Highly recommended if you're doing 4-man content or trials. This is an extremely good ultimate. It is a little expensive, but the overall benefits you get from it are quite good. But for grinding, I definitely prefer Flawless. It's just a quick, easy, cheap ultimate. Molten Armaments, this is going to give you your Major Brutality as a DK. This is also... I took this particular morph because it increases heavy attack damage. I don't do a lot of heavy attacks. I tend to light attack weave, but if you did a heavy attack, it's going to boost that. The main reason why I took this is if you take the other morph extends it up to 54 seconds, I believe. It extends the duration of it, which if you're someone that's not great with monitoring your skills, that might be the better morph. But there's a kind of a hidden advantage in the passives of the Earth and Heart abilities that this one, when you cast a Earth and Heart ability, you and your group gain minor brutality for 20 seconds. So that's an additional 10% weapon damage increase, which is very, very handy, especially if you're running with stam users. And for you yourself as well, it's going to boost yours. So this is something that you really do want to cast. You want to cast some sort of Earth and Heart ability every 20 seconds if you can, if it's convenient, because it's going to give you that boost to damage, both you and your group. So having this duration go 54 seconds or a minute and a half, however long it is, isn't as useful because I want to recast this at the 20-second mark. So I took this particular morph. I don't remember. So it appears to be the same cost. Increases duration, increases radius. Okay, so I thought maybe there was a cost difference, but so the cost of this is the same, but ultimately I want to cast this more often already, so the 54-second morph doesn't really help me. Aero Barrage is definitely the preferred morph if you're looking for more damage. This actually triggers the Maelstrom bow. So you can take the other morph. It lasts a little bit longer. Again, if you're someone that has trouble getting back to the back bar, I recommend taking the other morph. But if you're someone who's good with rotation and swapping back and forth, the Aero Barrage is going to do more damage overall. Poison injection, single target, built-in execute, solid damage. DK's Noxious Breath. This is an AoE, which is also giving you major breach. Anytime you are soloing, I highly recommend getting access to major breach. However you can do that, because this will increase when you're soloing. It's unless you've got a very, very oddball setup, you're unlikely to be reaching max penetration. And until you reach max penetration, generally speaking, you're not doing as much damage as you could be. So major breach is one of those things, if you're in a trial group, you can definitely overpenetrate, so you have to be careful what you're running there. But for solo, you're very rarely going to have that issue. So I highly recommend getting something on your bars that gives you major breach in one form or another. And DKs have that built in to Noxious Breath, which is very handy. Plus you're getting the dot damage out of this as well. Resolving Vigor for the heal, and we already covered Standard of Might, so that's the skill loadout. This and this are both really good for grinding, because this will, while it's up, will be doing damage constantly out to mob groups, and this of course is taking out mob groups. This is more, this is definitely single target, so it's more boss focused. You could potentially switch this out for something else, I suppose, if you're using this as a spammable. Same with this. This is single target. So this is kind of a combination for clearing mobs and bosses, because this is definitely single target, boss focused, single target, boss focused. Single target, boss focused. So it's a good mix of AoE and mobs versus damage to single targets. I think that's about it. Let's see real quick. Food and Mundus. Oh, okay, so I'm running the Atronac, but that's not what I would run on this build. This is one of those times they have yet to add Mundus Stone swapping to the armory's capabilities. So this is just a leftover from my tank build, because that's what I've primarily been running. Until they add that ability in to capture Mundus Stones, in a case like this, you're going to want to go switch your Mundus to something that's more useful for a stand build or whatever you're building. If you happen to be running a mag tank build along with a mag DD build, maybe Atronach would work for you, maybe it won't, but just be aware that your Mundus Stone will not switch, will not swap or change when you move between builds as of yet. They have indicated that they're going to add that capability, but as of right now, this is not possible. So you need to go manually change that to something else. The food is the same situation. This is another small thing that I hope they add at some point, that it'll swap out your foods. They do swap out your Q selection in the armory. This is one thing that I noticed, which was really nice because I have PvP builds that are using a lot of PvP gear in here for siege. It's that kind of thing. So you end up not needing, I don't need access to most of the personal assistants when I'm over in Cyrodiil, that kind of thing. So this is another thing that they do capture, which is nice. So that's definitely a benefit. But as far as actually swapping to a different food, you're going to have different food options in the Q wheel, but it won't actually switch your food. So I'm still using Bewitched based on the tank setup that I had. So both Mundus and food are something that you're going to end up having to switch manually when you swap between builds. So it's probably not something that you're going to want to do every 5 minutes. Most people don't, but it's more for me, hey, I feel like tanking today, so let me just go grab the Mundus and the food that I need for that, and maybe tomorrow I'll run damage, so I'll swap at that point. It looks like I was running, just from my Q wheel, it looks like I'm running Lava Foot for the food in this particular case. That's nice for recovery as well as stamina. And then Tri-Stat. Tri-Stat potions are pretty much a given on all my builds, pretty much. I can't think of a single build where I'm not using Tri-Stat potions, because it's going to give all 3 resources back, and these are things that you get from the daily logins in abundance. So I've got a ton of them in there. They're free, basically. And lastly, CP. Again, this is kind of up to personal preference. I don't claim to be an expert on the CP assignments. So in this case, I've got okay. So for the DK, I went with full status effects because they get resources back for poison and for flame damage. So this is actually a good passive to have, because it'll boost the chance to actually apply those status effects, which then of course helps with your resource sustain. So, and this is just giving additional weapon and spell damage to your martial attacks. Not sure why we need spell damage on that one, but out here we have damage over time. Being a DK, you do have a decent amount of dot damage, so this is a good one to take. AoE, you have, again, you have a decent amount of AoE, so this was another one that I used. Oh, it looks like I'm only using 3 slottables. It looks like I put the bulk of the points into passives, and then just went with a generic weapon and spell damage upgrade. So this is just adding 150 weapon and spell damage. Yeah, I for this particular build out, I don't claim that this is in any way optimized. I kind of missed the days of Constellations, I think was the add-on, where it would kind of run the math behind the scenes for you depending on what you pick. I'm not sure if there's I haven't even looked actually. There may be a new add-on that works with the new CP system, but that was definitely a handy add-on to find a good balance between damage and penetration and that kind of thing. So this is just what I'm running. Over here, as a DD, I generally, if I'm stamina, I like this. If I'm magicka, I like this. It helps with the sustain. It's basically just free resources. So generally I'll take whichever one is appropriate there. Health, again, for this particular loadout, I wanted more health because it'll help to compensate for the Palinal damage that's coming in. Status effects, when they're on me, this will help with my sustain as well. 25% cost reduction is significant. And then recovery in here for all three when you're under a negative effect. That's basically it. Again, this may or probably isn't the most optimal loadout, but that's just what I happen to choose. And Werewolf, I'm guessing, was just... I'm not sure why Werewolf is on here. Maybe I was leveling it. It is not required at all for this setup. You don't need it for the passive Major Brutality because you've got that built into your Molten Armaments. So I'm guessing I was just going to level Werewolf. That's on here purely for fun. Not required. So I think that's about it. I don't currently have a mag setup on this. Mag DK is definitely a lot of fun to play. You have access to a lot of really fun and cool skills in the DK kit for Magicka. I'm just slowly getting around to creating builds across all of these characters, so the mag build is still waiting in the works, I guess. So that covers the tanking and the DPS setup, and I think that covers it for this video. Thanks.